right now we're talking about strength in CrossFit. I mean, most relevant, I think, is quarterfinals this year, open this year. The testing is definitely changing. And I think the main body of CrossFit has said that it's going to be testing to serve kind of their needs. So we're going to have a discussion about who needs to be strong, who doesn't need to be focusing on strength. If you do need to focus on it, what time of the year, and just see where the combo goes.
I mean, I think the question really is, does strength matter as much as it has in the past if you're training for CrossFit and for performance in particular? So I had a couple athletes this week after quarterfinals reach out and be like, I crushed tests 1, 3, and 4, and we worked on a lot of strength, did the barbell cycling, awesome, but I was 2,000th in the burpee workout. What's wrong? And part of that probably was me as a coach maybe not focusing on burpees as much because we took the bet that they would only be in the open. But also, is it becoming a conditioning style test in quarterfinals where that matters more?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, when I look at the test this year, it was basically an extension of the open. Like, I see 4 scores, and I see one of those being a workout that anyone can do with like very low level of entry of skill, which was the burpee, box jump over, and wall ball, which had like a very similar impact on the leaderboard compared to the year before, which was the burpee pull-up shuttle run, where you saw good athletes that have good capacity in the sport and have proven that at a high level take a huge hit on points. So I think it's just like the test selection this year. And then also too, the pattern of also quarterfinals not having necessarily I guess open this year not having a 1RM test, quarterfinals last year having the heavy clean and jerk, but then the open last year having the thruster. I feel like the shift from just pure strength being tested in a 1RM format is getting a little bit different.
Yeah, I think
up to the quarterfinal level.
Yeah, up to the quarterfinals.
And if you're watching this in the future, we're talking about the 2024 season.
Yeah, the 2024 season. It was definitely different. And I think, to answer Brandon's question directly, I think for the elites now, especially getting to semifinals, which is almost like you're almost the best in the world at that point, with the cut being 40 per region, you basically need to focus less on strength now. Even the workout number 4 is a strength test, but it ended way lighter, and people were cycling that bar for 5 minutes. So it's much more strength endurance at the elite
it's like
level.
Legit conditioning. Watching Travis do that workout versus some other people that are strength limited, it was a completely different test for those athletes.
I mean, looking at the leaderboard on the elite level, and we'll cover those that aren't at the elite level and how different that is, but it looks like the same results of a Metcon, meaning like those that are typically really good at the Metcon as well. The strongest guys in the sport were not at the top of this, like they were up there and they were good at it, but the guys with the strongest clean and jerk did not win the clean and jerk event.
I wanted to pull out my calculator. So 245 was the final barbell. Travis clean and jerked, I think, 365 pretty safely right now.
That's cute.
That means 60. He's only at 67% of his 1 rep max on the highest barbell.
I wish.
I
would love that.
Yeah, but that's the equivalent of like the loading is just not testing pure strength anymore. It's much more, are you in shape enough to just keep moving this barbell when you're at max heart rate?
Okay. You mean at the higher level, right?
I said only at the elite. So that's where I started with the elite.
Let me pull that back a little bit. So it's 67% for him, but let's say that it's 85% for me. Now it is a strength test. So how do you differentiate between the athlete?
Yeah, I mean, it's still more of a strength test, I think. If you're starting to get above 85% of your 1 rep max, that is like most people, if they do an unbroken set of a movement at 85% of their 1 rep max, are going to maybe be able to do like somewhere between 3 and 7 reps. And then they're going to need a long recovery to be able to do it again. So you can't, if it's at that big of a percentage of your 1 rep max, you can't out fitness it. You're going to do a rep or 2 and then you're going to wait. And if you go too fast, you're going to miss the lift. You're not going to be able to hit the jerk. So for the lower level athlete, like on the opposite side of where Travis is, if you're getting to the 3rd barbell and now you're like, okay, well, this is 90% of my 1 rep max, it is more of a strength test, but you got to have some fitness to get there, because then the leaderboard is dictated by your tiebreaker on the previous rep. So it still becomes like, well, it's almost more important than to be conditioned enough that you can move light weights really fast, because you're going to get to a weight that you just can't do anymore.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the good conversation that we wanted to have was how important is it to train strength at this level in the stages? And just watching quarterfinals this past week, it highly depends. Like fully depends on the level, because we had elite level athletes doing it, and then we had class members that qualify just above the top 25%, and their experience was so different. You know, the elite levels are running through these workouts, accumulating as much work as possible, and then literally almost every workout for the class member or the low 25%, it was super bottlenecked based on strength limitations.
Yeah, like even workout one, the snatch and the step up for a 75th percentile type person is heavy and strength. So they basically did low reps on both of those and rode super hard.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I gave strategies out to like, class members and people that aren't very strong cycling barbell. I'm like, don't do any snatches. It's not worth it. Like, it's not worth you wasting any energy to get 1 or 2 reps. Just go row crazy hard and step up as much as you can.
Don't do any snatches?
Yeah, like that's a strategy to it.
Oh, snap.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
did you get excited about that?
Like, I know some people are going to be like,
that.
well, you're not going to do good. Yeah. I'm saying for those that like at their best could get 2 or 3 reps in the
You're
minute.
trying to beat your peers in that instance.
Yeah.
And wasting time, missing, failing.
Exactly.
135 pounds to an elite is like, well, should I touch and go it? And they're thinking those things. If your 1RM power snatch is 140, you're like, am I going to be able to lock this 1 rep out? It's just a different, it's just a different animal.
For sure.
At a lower level though, even lower than that, because quarterfinals is still a pretty good athlete relative to the field. Yeah. Lower than that, I think that's where actual strength is important, right? Like I actually got some flack in the comments about a comment I made about strength not being important because of the opens tests. But the pushback was, hey, a 50-pound or a 35-pound dumbbell snatch for a lot of reps is a strength test for a 50 percentile person. Deadlifting 185 or 185, 125 is pretty strong for a 50 percentile athlete. So there is a certain level that if you're at, then it's like, well, you have to prioritize just getting strong. Like that has to be a weight that you look at that you're like, oh, I can move it fast. If it's not, then you're just bottlenecked by everything, right? Like you're going to do 1 handstand push-up at a time, or you're going to do a snatch and then you're going to rest for 5 seconds before you do it again on the other side because it's just too heavy relative to your ability.
Yeah. I guess my question for you guys then is let's try to find the athlete that does need to work on their strength this offseason, because that's where everyone's at, right? Like quarterfinals, when we're doing this podcast, quarterfinals just finished and people are already thinking, I want to either make quarterfinals, I want to improve next year, I want to do this offseason competition, but I'm not sure what I need to work on. So what level of athlete should be working on their strength this time of year?
That's a good question. I have it's kind of like a turn or a tangent. It might not be a level, but it's a mindset that some people are in. If you're burnt out, one of the best things that you can do, and like burnt out meaning like the season was really hard, the open tests were really hard, you just went through the quarterfinals, you retested everything, you didn't make it to semifinals, and your next competition focus is going to be a year from now for the season. If you're kind of like, hey, I don't really want to do max effort Metcons, I feel like I'm in pretty good shape, I just want to get healthy again, get my joints feeling good. That's like the perfect mental profile of somebody that should be like, okay, well, just focus on strength, skills, easy stuff, and get your vitality back before you start hammering Metcons again. That's not as much athletic level, but I think it's still relevant based on where we are in the season.
Yeah, and I think too, just knowing like how the sport and those styles of difficult, intense Metcons treats you and what it does to your body, your mindset, going along with what you're saying, it is a bit of a break. Like it's an opportunity to like bring the intensity down on that metabolic pain side and actually just do some strength work, bodybuilding for a little bit, which is like something I always tell athletes when they finish the season, regardless of how strong they are or not. It's like a good break.
Sure. So I'm the athlete though that does the open and then I do quarterfinals and I go through it and I'm looking at my scores and I did really bad on workout 4 and workout 1, but my worst workout was workout 2. Let's say I only
2 was the burpees.
2 is the burpee.
Ball.
2 is the burpee workout. So then in my head, that's my worst workout. So I need to start working on my conditioning right away.
Yeah.
But I couldn't clean and jerk the 245-pound bar. Let's say that I can only get 2 or 3 snatches on the first workout. Am I someone that then should focus on the conditioning, or should I go ahead and start focusing on my strength work?
Yeah, I mean, I think for those people, it's a little bit of both. Like it's kind of like a couple camps. There's okay, I'm going to do a huge focus on conditioning because there's a glaring weakness. The opposite side of that is like, I'm so strength limited at everything and all I need to do is strength, or I want to feel better, so I'm going to do strength stuff. And then there's kind of that middle group of people where it's like, hey, you still do need well-rounded development. So if you're somebody that got exposed in, the strength and 4, the heavy component of 1, and then the conditioning in 2 also got you, and you're pretty like well-rounded, not good at all of them.
Really bad.
Yeah. Then you kind of just like, it's like, all right, well, you got to focus on a well-rounded program and maybe pick and individualize what skills you work on, what skills you prioritize. Maybe you do a little bit of extra strength work in certain areas, but
yeah, I mean, I always lean towards, if it's kind of like a mix of both, pick the one you're most excited to do right now. Like, let this be a time where you choose the one that you're excited to do.
Will people end up picking the wrong one potentially, or is there? You're saying there's not a wrong one? Or?
I will say, just looking through our programs, and we have a lot of amazing people that work really hard in TD to Compete or individual athletes. Over the last 2 years, especially when we're looking at our results, one of the things that I've found is those that are kind of they I don't want to say do well-rounded poor fitness, but those that aren't good at any of the tests, when we actually dig into the numbers, the first thing that they still truly need is to develop the strength, because it's not just that they're bad at burpees. It's like, it's actually hard for them to get off the ground after 50 total reps because they don't have the upper body strength, or they do workout 4 and they are really struggling, not just because of any conditioning aspect, but they can't lift the 185 bar, the 225 bar, the 245 bar. And then the same thing's true. They may say, my conditioning was limiting me in workout 1, which again was the snatch, the row, and the step ups, but they couldn't do more than 6 or 8 step ups in a round because they weren't strong enough to get on the box. So yes, we want to build that conditioning base, but I think it's a really good time in the off season, particularly right now when you're getting back into training, to build the strength first, because that conditioning will come as you raise your level of strength. Everything else can kind of follow suit, especially with some of the cycling and the external load we do in the sport.
So what would be the pitfall, I guess, if they did that for that group you just described? If they said, hey, I'm going to actually do endurance, I'm going to focus on endurance now instead of the strength, what's going to happen?
I think what the tendency is that you get into a good groove with conditioning and you see some conditioning improvements, but anytime you go back to the normal testing in the sport, so like we were just talking about with the quarterfinal workouts. Yeah, maybe they weren't strength tests, but for a lot of people, they were still strength limited. And so they go into them and they feel like they're more conditioned, but workout 1 doesn't get any better. And they're like, why? Well, it's because the snatch is still extremely hard. It's 90% of your 1RM, or the step ups are still really hard because you can't do double dumbbell box step ups at a fast pace. So it'd be better to get stronger there to make those reps easier for you. I always like to say this with like a deadlift, for example. We see 225 pound deadlifts or 185 pound deadlifts in the open for males. If your max deadlift is 250 pounds and you got to do 225, even if you have a huge VO2 max and you can do all the cyclical work in the world, 225 is going to be really challenging. If I can raise that up to 315 without any deadlift work, it's going to at least feel easy in the first couple rounds. And then now I just have to layer in a conditioning base to that.
Yeah. I think the pitfall, to like directly answer your question, is that CrossFit is so stressful at the competitive level. It's very stressful on the structure, right? Like, you got to have strong joints to be in the positions. You're doing a ton of reps. So if you start to go very conditioning heavy, you build kind of the internal systems to breathe hard and pump blood and like be able to withstand fatigue, but your structures can start to get less resilient under load. And you take for granted that doing a burpee box jump over, there's still a lot of load that you have to absorb going from 24 inches, dropping down to the ground and landing on your feet 150 times after doing 150 squats. So the strength work for the less talented athletes is also like a protective mechanism against injury and being durable enough to continue training when the Metcon season starts to come. So I think it's probably for the lower level athletes the most important thing to do, because you're going to get your conditioning once the season starts to ramp up. You're going to be doing Metcons, intervals, cyclical work, but you really only have like one period in the year where you could just be like, all right, I'm going to prioritize either building muscle or getting better grip strength to climb the rope. Or
and define that period. What is that period you're talking about?
I mean,
what's
like
the window?
Yeah, I mean, like right after quarterfinals, you probably have. When our cycle structure, we usually do the limiter block, then 2 summer cycles before we really start picking up and getting ready
back into in season. So we basically have 3 off-season cycles.
Yeah, so it's kind of
when
like
it starts ramping back up into the normal stuff. What time of year is that?
Usually the fall.
Yeah, the fall.
Yep.
So
Middle
you
of
have
October.
you have a couple
October
of months to
those not on our season schedule.
Yeah. You do have
Dan
you have a couple months to figure it out and let your fitness fall. I know the ethos of CrossFit is to be like ready for everything
Always ready.
all the
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
but there's like no one in the world that's ready to be max effort and peak 24/7 all the time, except maybe like, I mean, you could make the argument that military people or something are doing that, but a lot of them are also not regulated by drugs or other things that allow them to be at that
it seems like people
superhuman
are
level.
really in tune with when their conditioning drops. That's when they feel out of shape, where very rarely is anyone like, my strength's down a little, I feel out of,
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think going back to like, it's about the strength improving the resilience. It's the same reason that marathoners and distance runners do strength support work. No, they don't need it to actually feel stronger when they're running, but they do it so that they can prevent the overuse injuries. And CrossFit's very similar because over time, as your capacity continues to improve, you have a higher expression of power, and you need strength to support that so that you can have the joint resiliency when you're able to start doing more reps unbroken. You're starting to accumulate more volume. Like if you're capacity increases next year and you're able to do 2.5 rounds of the burpee box jump over a wall ball, you have a higher potential of you're accumulating more volume. So therefore your body's just taking more. Like it's a big improvement, or it's a big increase in total volume accumulated in that time.
Yeah. Any off season in any sport usually starts shifting to people doing more strength and very easy conditioning. Like coaches will say, hey, make sure you go for walks and like stay on your feet so you're moving, but don't go sprinting and changing direction. You're like outside of sport, you have like hey, we're all bodies. In order to stimulate testosterone and all the things that make you more healthy and more robust, you need loading on the spine, and you need to be time under tension to drive muscle growth and all of this stuff. When people go heavy conditioning, a lot of those underlying health markers start to get worse. So if you look at blood profiles, even of elite athletes in this sport, you'll start to see some negative health deterioration as they start to get peaked physically. And you can turn that around if you say, okay, well, in an off season, we ramp back up and we get healthy. And then you have this wave of health that's happening throughout the year as your performance is going up and down. So I think it's a good thing for people to think about is, okay, well, I might be doing this for myself as an athlete, but I'm also doing this for myself as a human to make sure that when next season comes around, I can be more healthy to tolerate it because I just love participating in it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that clear differentiator from this season ending going into the next, where you have that opportunity to basically you're building reserve to have a longer, more extended career in doing this. And sometimes that means taking a break from the traditional styles of training that you're doing.
So y'all been doing this 10 plus years. When you get to this stage with that level athlete and you tell them, hey, well, let's focus on strength right now, is this a hard sell to them, or is like, what are you up against when you pitch it to them?
This is where I think this year is going to confuse people and probably be a harder sell than normal because it was only 4 tests. And I would say when I look at this test and I think of years past, I'd see like Metcon, strength endurance, and then test 5. I'm talking about those that did not qualify for semis but are well above the top 25%. Test 5 could be a 1 rep max snatch, and then that's like normally what I think you would see. Like you got barbell cycling under fatigue, then you'd have like a heavy rep 1 rep max snatch. And that to me kind of answers your question more clearly of, am I strength limited or not? But now people have finished this test, the quarterfinal test, and they're kind of unsure. It was clear if they got smashed in the burpee box jump over, but there was other Metcons that they could have struggled in as well. And I think especially like the clean and jerk one, where it's like, I don't know, like, was that my strength? Like, I'm not really sure. So I feel like for some people, it's going to be a hard conversation to sit down and be like, look, I still need to get data on you relative to what I know about the field to show that like, these were some of the strength limitations that you had, even though it wasn't exposed in the way of it actually being like a 1RM test.
I think it's important too that you don't want to be too reactive to 1 year's worth of tests.
Yes.
Right? Like if we looked at the last 10 or 12 years, there have been plenty of strength tests. And for 5 straight years, we've talked about this before, but if you actually look at the field, they got a little bit taller and a little bit bigger, both male and female side, because so many things were strength tests as opposed to it being old school conditioning. Now they've just shifted that a little bit because of the 25% rule in quarterfinals. I want to just jump real quick and let's talk about strength in like more detail. Yeah, nice job.
Butt jump.
Let's use me as the athlete. Let's just say again, I go back through my test and
mediocre,
I definitely need very mediocre. Let's say I definitely need to work on my strength.
When I sort you here, 3 lung divisions.
I wish. I need my strength. I'm going to focus on strength in the off season. you guys talk about what I need to do as an athlete if I'm starting right now.
You?
Just the athlete that needs to get stronger.
Oh, okay.
No,
Pretend that I'm just
I was like, yeah. You're talking about somebody that actually is like, hey, we're going off season. Mike, you kick this off, man.
Well, I think you would do really well in the clean and jerk. And I think
No.
Pretend I'm the weaker athlete.
Yeah, it's not actually Brandon.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just pretending to
He's
be
saying
Thank you, though. I appreciate it.
I was like already analyzing
If he was
it.
in the camp that needed to improve their strength right now.
Yeah. He's
Go to
basically
Max because
saying
I'm overwhelmed right now with possibilities.
he's too caffeinated.
Yeah.
Well, I think the number one thing that people probably won't like to hear, and I've had this conversation with people in the past, is pull out the max effort Metcons.
Yeah.
It's the thing that
But I really like doing them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Brandon, play.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Play
what
that character.
Yeah.
I want to throw
Let's see
this.
this.
Hey, but
This will be an athlete-coach conversation.
so
All right. So
Yeah.
if you want doing them,
Interference.
is it more important for you to perform well in the sport or have fun doing what you're doing in training?
the burpees were just really hard for me this year. Though.
Answer my question, man. Yeah, but that is important. It's an important distinction. Chris has brought this up a lot of times because I talk to people as if what they're telling me is what they actually want. They're like, I want to be better in the sport. I'm like, all right, well, this is what we're
Yeah.
going to do. And they're like, but I don't like this. I'm like, I don't give a shit. Like, this is what you do. You want to get better? This is what you should do. If you want to have fun, then we can blend it or there's a compromise, but it's very
Example. I want to be stronger. All right, cool. Hey, we got your strict press up 15 pounds, but my shoulders aren't bigger.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. You're stronger.
Yeah. Or I want to get stronger. I clean and jerked more, but I did worse in workout number 4. I'm like, yeah, but you didn't say I want to do better at barbell cycling workouts. You said you wanted to get stronger, and it's not always a direct correlation. So I think it's very important if somebody is in that camp to figure out what's the compromise. Because if you want to get stronger, but then you also want to do, a hero workout on Monday every week, a 3-minute Fran type benchmark on Tuesday, chipper that's super long on Wednesday, intervals on an echo bike on Friday, and burpee bonanza on Saturday every week, and you're exhausted, and then every time you go to lift, your weights are 5 to 10% lower, and you're doing that in all your progressions, you're not going to get stronger at a faster rate. So there's a compromise.
What happens if I am the athlete that needs to get stronger? So I'm doing my strength work that you write me, Max, but then I do the burpee bonanza and the Fran and all that. Like, is there an interference effect that may happen?
Yeah. I mean, there is, but elite athletes can handle getting better at all of it together, right? And that's what a lot of people look at, right? They see Alexis or Travis or Noah or Matt Frazier doing all these row progressions, all these strength progressions, and then hitting Metcons on top of it. But they're full-time athletes. They're better genetically. I know that's hard to stomach, but they have they have bodies that are just incredible. And they have 10 years of training history backed up to be consistent to get to that point. For most people, they get tired, they get sore, their injury rate likelihood goes up. They come in the next day and their triceps are so tired from doing handstand push-up high volume under fatigue that they can't lock out their jerks. So what ends up happening is at the expense of building that grit and mental toughness and fortitude of dealing with acid and high breathing and the relief that comes with it, they get all that stuff that comes from the Metcons, but they don't get stronger. And you see that there's a ton of people, especially at the class level, that have been doing CrossFit consistently for 5-10 years, and they're not stronger at all. But they're way more fit. They'll PR their 2K row, they'll PR their 5K run, they'll crush a Metcon, but they're not stronger. So it's important to really decide, well, what's important? Is it, some balance? Like, do you want to do 1 or 2 Metcons a week instead of none? But if you truly are like, hey, I'm very strength limited and I need to get stronger, the strongest people in the world, they do strength work all the time and not a lot of the other stuff.
Mike, how do you think about layering in the gymnastic strength work at this time of year? Because that's also something that I've seen with athletes is like they didn't do well on workout 3 if we're using the quarterfinals theme, and they're thinking about like, oh, the handstand push-ups slowed me down, the ring muscle-ups, rope climbs, whatever. I need to get better at gymnastics. But the first step is like they couldn't even do a strict handstand push-up. Is that a strength thing or is it just a skill thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's largely more of a strength thing than a skill thing. So especially watching like the quarterfinal test this weekend for the those just above top 25%. The toe to bar and the gymnastics workout. Everyone, like elites, were saying, like, why were those even there? It was so fast. It wasn't even that challenging. What is enough handstand push-ups? And I'm watching all those other athletes barely get through all that stuff.
It's a different workout.
It's a very different workout. So when we normally say strength, everyone just is always assuming moving an external load, like barbell strength, dumbbell strength. But you got to also look at your ability to be strong moving your own body and to stabilize your body, to support yourself when you're in a static position. So yeah, I mean, I think when I write like a strength template, especially like a strength bias for an off season, I'm considering both. And I'm considering the athletes that myself, you know, like if I did a strength bias template, it would probably have way more gymnastic strength work than it would barbell cycling work, because, you know, my weakness in getting in the bottom of a dip and being able to support myself is really weak. You know, like I can do a very heavy weighted dip, but if you put me into that isometric position and that hold, like I'm very weak there, especially under fatigue. So I'm going to be spending a lot of time in those positions. And I think that people overlook the importance of that to develop the ability to basically have more strength in the gymnastics movements when they are faced with them in Metcons.
Why do you think they overlook it?
Because it's not often talked about in that way. Like you think of gymnastics as more skill based. Like I need to do drills and technique work. And yes, you do. It's very important. But if you can have a very large strength base and your ability to support yourself on the top of the rings, the bottom of the rings, to hang, all these different isometric positions, it's going to allow you to express more speed and power and build endurance in those movements as you're working on the skills when you do that.
Yeah, I think it's also because CrossFit was like prior to CrossFit, all of the information in the market about strength was split up. You had weightlifting coaches like Greg Everett and whatever, and the Russians that were teaching weightlifting. You had Westside coming in and teaching powerlifting. You had Chris Summers with gymnastics bodies, and the CrossFit gymnastics people, and Carl Paoli teaching gymnastics.
Zone diet.
Yeah. And all of those little funnels, they are experts in doing what they're doing, but they're not experts in how to do all of the other components of it. So they're like best practices in gymnastics, for example. A lot of them,
how to mix them into Metcons. And
in Metcons, but also mix them into training. So if you went to a gymnastics gym in the past, and maybe still a lot of their coaches don't know how to do strength work to assist their athletes, right? Like they wouldn't even know if there were barbells in the gym, how to integrate that in. So all their best practices were built around the gymnastic strength, skills, the
specificity of the sport.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now we're starting to see like, oh, well, if you get people really strong with a barbell, and then you teach them some sort of body shaping and body alignment stuff, when they start doing handstand push-ups, they're really good at them. So there's this like ability that has developed over time. And when I taught it in the strength course, all the principles of strength training are the same. Whether you're applying them to gymnastics, like strict handstand push-ups, or unilateral work, like a dumbbell step-up, which is a little bit of a different form of strength, versus something that's more power expression, like weightlifting. But if you want to be strong all around, then you need kind of an all-around strength program.
You need to integrate them.
Yeah, you need it integrated. You can't just do weightlifting and then expect that your back squat and weighted pull-up are going to go up. You got to integrate all those things.
It's funny because there are still a lot of programs out there in the CrossFit space that do that. It's just a weightlifting program or just a powerlifting program. Yeah. Do you think that it would be better for most athletes to follow an integrative strength plan that like touches all of those things?
Yeah, I mean, I think so.
Okay. I think for the sport of CrossFit.
Yes. The one thing I'd caveat that with is if you weightlift 4 days a week or 5 days a week and you really focus on all the technical details, your weightlifting will probably go up faster than if you're doing an integrated one.
Because you're only focusing on that.
Exactly. It's easy to get better if you're focusing on is one or two things.
Right.
But if you are thinking, okay, I want to be good at, barbell cycling, 1RMs, picking up dumbbells and stepping onto something over and over again, lunging with my arms over my head, kicking up onto my hands, you can't really expect that there's going to be a lot of cross carryover from weightlifting to that stuff. The people that are on those pure weightlifting programs are then also on all of these other skill programs and things that they're kind of blending in. So I don't think that you'd get a lot of success in just picking one unless you're very low level and you need a huge jump in just that one thing.
Yeah, I mean, and to educate the listener a little bit, like it comes down to needs analysis for what you have with what your weakness is in the sport. In CrossFit, we have a good idea of what those needs are, and it's a blend of those things. Obviously, weightlifting, it's like, no, you don't need to do a lot of gymnastics, body weight, strength training because it's not tested. It's not a need in that level of the sport. So, yeah, like when we look at each year the tests come out, we try to stick to the main principles that we have in terms of strength development, and then we also bring in the needs of what the test is actually bringing in and like actually showcasing that year. Sometimes it changes a little bit. Sometimes it doesn't have a massive impact on what our like big picture values and plans are with what we believe actually gets an athlete better in the sport.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Max.
Well, you brought it up earlier, not to be reactive about the tests. And it's very important for people to keep in mind, like, the ethos of CrossFit is be good at everything. So we could see a subset of tests this year that's all conditioning. And then next year they come in and they add like a CrossFit total to the open and a weightlifting total to quarterfinals. And it completely changed everything that we said about the importance of conditioning and this and that.
And completely changed the leaderboard as well.
So with that in mind, what's the best way to approach this sport?
I think you need to be able to think critically, or, I mean, I know it's not accessible to everyone, but have a coach that can think critically for you.
I thought you were talking about think critically. Not accessible to some people.
That is also true.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, but you got to be able to look at the sport and say, okay, well, there's weightlifting metrics and, you know, there's levels. So you want to be a games athlete, you can just go to the CrossFit Games and see when they've tested weightlifting at the CrossFit Games, where are people? And that just gives you a like, okay, well, that's where I need to be. If you're not a CrossFit Games athlete, you need to kind of pick where the level is and do some leaderboard digging to see. So you have weightlifting numbers, you have CrossFit total numbers, you have total 2.0 numbers, you have weightlifting tests under fatigue, you have Metcons that are all body weight, you have Metcons that are all gymnastics. You have to be able to look at yourself on a leaderboard and remove some of the emotion and just look at where your points are being won and lost. And then when you do that, you start to prioritize. Like, our online program, it has a lot of complexity to it. There's multiple paths, there's multiple skill programs. We built it that way so that people could individualize to look at, hey, well, this is where I am, this is what I want to compete in, and this is what I need to get better at. And then you can choose the option or work with a coach that helps you shape that for yourself. I think it's very hard to give broad-based like, oh, well, you want to be great at CrossFit, then just do the same CrossFit that somebody really good that you like is doing and you're going to get there. I just don't think that works.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people want to have their own individual tests, and I think that's good where it's independent of being compared on a leaderboard because it's measuring your own individual progress to yourself compared to yourself. But that doesn't compare against your peers, the field that you're competing against, because the field that you're comparing yourself against can change how you view how good or bad you are at something. And what I mean by that is the CrossFit's, I think, so early in its stage of development of sport for a large mass that there's not clear levels.
Yeah.
And that makes it really tough because you could be comparing to the quarterfinal leaderboard and think like, well, I have these strength deficits, but if you took out the elites out of that division and you're only comparing against your 25 to 15% athletes, then your strengths and weaknesses look very different. You're probably more rounded as an athlete. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Yeah.
So that's why I think comparing the leaderboards is helpful for you to know what direction to go in.
Yeah, leaderboards, not just of the open, but participating in competitions, doing qualifiers on a regular basis, measuring up, honestly, participating in a community. But like being in a community where there's a lot of people at a lot of different levels that you're training at helps you establish a peer group that could say like, oh man, me and John keep doing workouts together, and every time there's burpees in them, he's killing me. But every time there's, heavy lifting, I'm killing him. And there's an opportunity to start to identify within your sphere of similar competitors what you should work on. But you got to identify what those things are. Again, it's very dependent upon if you truly want to get better at the sport and be ready for anything that comes out, then you have to be able to think critically and objectively about what could come out and then figure out based on what could come out, where would I score the worst? And you got to work on that while also trying to refine the things that would help you score the best.
All right, can I jump in real quick? So earlier we had the athlete that Brandon brought up where you said that, hey, this is the athlete, you need strength.
Right.
Like it's not even a question. This is what you're doing. And then earlier, y'all also mentioned that this might be one of the trickier years with that. So you have the group we just talked about, then you have elites. Those two are in their own little world. But that in between, how are they supposed to think about strength right now?
That's what I was defining as being a little bit trickier, because the elites, it was, again, like for all of them, they were able to just run through those movements.
Yeah.
It was about accumulating reps as fast as possible. The lower end, it was about being strategic about executing at the right moment so that every rep counted. And then that middle ground, it is kind of like you're unsure.
Yeah, I mean, and I think with the unsure, if you're going to create a bell curve, most of those people need development in all areas. So they're not going to pick a purely strength or a purely conditioned training program unless they need an off season. They're going to choose,
Which is a lot of people.
Yeah. If you need an off season, I don't think there's a shame. Like people are like, oh, I got to take a break. I'm like, yeah, well, it's hard. Like it's okay to take a temporary break and get back in. But I think for when those people are ready, well-rounded development's probably the best bet. Is do a little bit of pure strength progressions, a little bit of sport specificity or skill or refining a skill, and a little bit of like base building conditioning, and try to get all those variables kind of up together. There will be people who are obviously too weak or too unconditioned that might bias one way or the other, but most of that middle group is probably just like, hey, you just keep getting better at everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly how we built out the compete for these off-season cycles that begin. We have the strength bias path. We have the endurance-based options for those that are clearly engine limited. And then the RX Plus, the intermediate, like those are more of like the rounded, a small blend of strength, a small blend of conditioning, and then options for your own individual skill development that you need in that time if you're unsure and you're kind of in that middle ground. That's like a great opportunity to follow that template.
But all that aside, is it this time of year for everybody where you would focus a little more on strength, even if it's not like y'all just have more strength?
Maybe, but
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that this is contingent upon a lot of our athletes, because they're elite, they wrap their years around the CrossFit Games structure.
Yeah.
Now there's a lot more people competing in the sport who are like, oh yeah, I'll do open and quarterfinals, but they might be getting ready for a competition qualifier coming up in June or something like that.
Yeah.
So again, it's part of why we have optionality, is because we don't know.
Optionality?
Is that not a word?
I don't know.
It's
Sounds
why-
good.
Yeah, it sounded good. Smooth.
It's part of why we have options, so that you can choose if you, hey, all right, I did the open, I did quarterfinals, I feel great. I did it all one time just to see where I was. I'm ready to train today. It's like, all right, well, yeah, you can train, but you probably don't need to go into a pure strength or pure endurance, because you're getting ready for another competition that might only be 8 weeks away or 12 weeks away. So that's a whole different person than somebody who's like, hey, I put everything into the year. I just did quarterfinals. I retested everything. I didn't make semifinals. So now my season's shorter than I had anticipated. That person should probably like turn it down for a little while and shut it down.
I think the key is the optionalities.
I either invented a new word.
No,
This
sorry,
conversation
you're
is-
not that special. The quality of being able to be chosen but not obligatory.
Oh, that's a real world.
It is. Yeah.
That
And
means
that
it's
is right.
accurate, right?
Yeah.
We don't have an obligatory path. We have optionality
Yeah.
paths.
I know we're going to reiterate this, but I mean, you said it right. When one size doesn't fit all, especially in this sport, because there's so much variance and the test will change every single year. We saw this back in 2017 where it was the dumbbell year at regionals. If everyone remembers that, that's an OG in the sport, right? The year before was super heavy, and then it was all dumbbells, and it flipped everything on its head. People started training dumbbells, and then the next year was heavy again. That could be the case. So strength still is going to matter a lot. And I know we're saying like there's all these different options, but if you are even questioning that, this is a good time of the year to get into a good strength program, like our strength bias program we have. But if you're not, then there's still other options. In particular, in our program, we have well-rounded fitness for those that need it.
Yeah,
Because we built it with optionality.
I think going back to the critical thinking, like you need to get a general idea of what you feel is best for you at this moment. That comes down to your timeline of season. That comes down to how deep of a hole you dug to give your best in quarterfinals. Some did 4 workouts and it was probably like, all right, I didn't really peak mentally for that. I just did them and like I want to do something else now. Like that's the awesome side of having options in the program, is like the ability to choose that, but also to like, again, like a lot of people are like, I'm really strong. I don't know if that's like the right thing to do right away. And I'm like, look, the strength bias doesn't necessarily mean that you're maxing out back squat every week. Like there's bodybuilding in there, there's isometric work. We have a lot of new styles of progressions that we created of overcoming isometrics, things that we talk about a lot in the strength course that are different styles of training and give you a different stimulus that's going to be really good for your mind because it's just getting out of the patterns of doing all the power lifts, all the Olympic lifts, and all like the max effort, high percentage work that we've been doing all year long.
Yeah, I don't think people really, or I guess when you're in the enthusiasm of it, it's very easy to overlook how hard it is on your body because we think of it as exercise is healthy, and it is. But when anything is taken to an extreme level of speed and fatigue and mental focus and whatever, it's hard on your system. And if you go through something very challenging like that, it's good to kind of wave and go in and out of it. So, yeah. I would agree with you.
I got a question for y'all. If y'all deleted all the coaching information y'all had in your brains and y'all were just getting into CrossFit, even if y'all had some fitness, you're not like a new person, but you just don't have the knowledge you have, can someone like that just jump into this sport now and not have a coach? Because this whole conversation has only highlighted to me that I wouldn't know what the hell to do because there's so many variables that it's like my brain would be fried trying to figure it all out.
Yeah. I mean,
Are we past those days where you could just figure it out for yourself?
I think that a very industrious person could maybe find all the information they need on YouTube, blogs, whatever, but I think it would be almost a full-time research job to try to figure it out. I think that
and some people like doing that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a huge advocate of getting guidance or coaching in anything that you're doing new because like, all right, I've done it with X amount of people, or we've done it in the program with X amount of people and seen what happens over time. So if somebody's starting with our guidance versus on their own, the likelihood that they're going to make some of the early mistakes that are just dumb are really low if you do it with somebody that has experience. When you do it yourself, like all of us kind of started in that generation of CrossFit that we were just figuring out. And I can only speak for myself, but I did a lot of dumb shit that like really set me back or got me so sore that I didn't train for 2 weeks after it, borderline rhabdoed myself. Like those decisions that you make in your earlier days they're hindrances to your long-term progression. And I could help people avoid those, or we could help people avoid those and say like, or for me, for example, I wanted to get more conditioned. So I thought just hammering Metcons all the time was going to do it. And then I'd burn myself out, get injured, come back, do it. And I would be very inconsistent in training because of that. Whereas if I had guidance, somebody might be like, hey, you need to do more low intensity work and maybe only do the hard stuff 2 or 3 days a week and help build a structure that was sustainable. And I think that's just important.
I agree. And I think it depends on the community that you come into. So going back, like I'm coming into this fresh, and I think of the first gym I went to, it was like super strict, hardcore CrossFit methodology where it was like variance, like randomization, you're doing strength occasionally, and like that's all you do for the day. And that worked for a while. And like I got very fit because it was such a novel stimulus. And then I went to another gym where the leaders and coaches had a strength and conditioning background, a very structured mindset on how you progress at certain things, seeing where I'm limited on certain things. So they both can work. But it's just a matter of like where you're at and how long you've been doing it. We get people that message us all the time that are new to like our style of training in the program. They're like, I felt the best I've felt this year doing way less with just a little more structure to it, where I'm just kind of focusing on one thing at a time. And like, I just performed way better. Now, that may not have worked for them when they first came in, like it probably was too structured and they were probably not getting enough touches on certain things, so I think it just kind of depends on where someone is coming in.
And it could potentially be less fun. I mean, the reality is...
What could be less fun?
Well, thinking about your progression in a systematic way is sometimes less fun, like Brandon had alluded to when he said, I just want to do Metcons. Like, people just want to play sometimes. And CrossFit is kind of like play exercise. It's like, hey, we're going to make up this race. And that is engaging and it's mentally stimulating. And in the beginning days, when you're just learning all the things, it's easy to get progress just like coming in and doing it. But you get to a certain level of performance of relative to your own potential where that stops working, or you're like, oh well, every time this keeps coming up, I'm not good at it. So people will start to intuitively work on what they need to work on, even if they are that person. So I think if you're truly somebody that says, hey, I'm getting into this for personal development or sport performance, or I really want to be my best version of doing this as a competitor, then I think you should have some structure and guidance. If you're doing it more for like fun and fitness and you're recreational and you're recreational, some of the nuance we talk about just might not be as important because it's just like, hey, you just want to do the thing and have fun.
Yeah, I mean, that's on the class level, you have members that like they want to do CrossFit because they enjoy it and to be fit. And then you have members that want to do CrossFit to be better at CrossFit. And that approach is very different. And I think how it treats someone is like your teeth. Some people can eat candy every day and not get cavities. And then someone like me, if I eat candy every day, I got to go to the dentist all the
time. Bringing it back to the person who said, Brandon, that they need strength. What's the realistic expectation that if someone goes through this, you said it was about 2 months before you
No, we said 2 or 3 cycles.
Yeah.
So
that's 24 weeks.
Yeah.
So
if someone
4.5 to 6 months, depending on the
someone
person.
really locked in during that time who was in that camp that needed to get stronger, what kind of realistic expectation can you set for them?
Ooh. Assuming
like
are you assuming that they're more of a beginner athlete or
in the camp that Brandon was talking about?
Yeah,
earlier.
but it's different if that person is a beginner versus an intermediate.
Well, then talk about
training
all the things.
age. Yeah. If they're a beginner, you could see really big gains in 6 months, especially if people are young. I mean, Caden in his off season put 50 pounds on his lifts in 6 months. He's 17 years old, a newer athlete, like those types of training gain, and also very talented. So
puberty cycle.
Yeah. So I don't think that's realistic for everybody to expect. But in a 6 month window, you can make substantial strength progress, 20, 30 pounds on a lift. If you're more intermediate athlete that's been on strength cycles and has focused on it and you're just a slow gainer, then those marginal gains just become smaller and harder for you to get. But you still should do it, because if you don't and you just like keep hammering hard conditioning, instead of your strength going up slightly, it will start to go down slightly. And then you're at an even bigger deficit in the sport. So,
and in particular for aging athletes, for masters athletes, we talk about this all the time in the masters program, but it's important that you at least keep your strength. Even if you're not getting stronger, as you age up, it's going to matter more that you're stronger and stronger and stronger. But that number may just stay the same. You may be 40, and then if you're 45 and then 50, 55, and you have the same PRs, you're going to be way better off than the athlete that's deteriorating over time.
Yeah, that's actually really impressive if you can do that.
Right.
If you can maintain your strength for 2 decades, as you're over 50.
It's like the war of attrition at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's where we see in our program, people stay, we're thinking about the long game, and we're trying to keep them healthy, and then we have a lot of masters athletes that end up qualifying as they continue to age up.
Yep.
I think me and Brandon were talking about this the other day when we were talking about strength. Another thing I noticed personally is that when I do focus on strength, let's say I do hit PRs, but let's say I don't. What I do also get is that I feel good when I'm hitting the numbers I'm hitting versus feeling like it's a grind. Yeah. And that has to account for something.
Yeah. And mentally, progression feels good. Like when you put a lot of work in and you see, oh, this went up, that feels good. It's like winning something. CrossFit makes that very challenging because you don't test the same things very often. Like a lot of people talk about the benchmarks being important and being your place to benchmark. But when you really look around the community, people might be doing Murph once a year. A lot of people are not using those benchmarks anymore. And most importantly, those benchmarks are very rarely used in the actual tests of the sport. So the testing in the sport is always changing. And if you get a year like this, that's all conditioning, and you're a power athlete, it could look like you got worse after a year of really hard work. And that messes with people's minds. So I think the strength is a good thing to anchor to. And also on the opposite side, simple conditioning, like just testing a 2K row or a 1 mile run a couple times a year, or a pure burpee test like number 2, and knowing like, oh, my fitness is getting better. Because it's not like the skill of the burpee is going to get much better for trained athletes.
Well,
like you just got to be more fit.
Let's start to wrap a bow on this. Do y'all want to do another one for the other people who are like endurance or skills?
Yeah, I think that's the question that we've had a lot over the last couple of days is like, hey, I need to build my endurance. I crushed the other test, but number 2 in particular was really bad for me. I feel like I didn't do well in the burpees. And it could just be a burpee limitation, but I think most people are looking at just conditioning in general, and then also conditioning in the sport, not just like, am I good at a 2K row, but can I do all the fast stuff in the sport that is a little bit more chaotic?
Yeah, which I think I've also got questions about the skills too, because I think because of 3 specifically, workout number 3, like actual rope climb ability to invert on the hands. I don't think really toes to bar is a super high level skill, but skills and engine are probably the two big limiters for people.
Totally.
Anything else on strength while we're here? Final words. Everybody has a final say. Let's start it off with Brandon.
I just want to do the burpee test.
Speaking of strength, Kyle Ruth, Kyle Habdo, and I did a blog article called How Strong Do You Need to Be in CrossFit? And we laid out some strength metrics for a bunch of strength metrics. And in this podcast, you had mentioned, how do I know how strong I need to be? That could be a good place for somebody to start just doing some research and introspection.
Can we link that? Let's just link it
to link it in the description. Check that out. And that can kind of give you an idea. If you like look at it and you're like, oh, this is where the 90th percentile is, and I want to be a 90th percentile athlete, you could see how far away you are. And if you're really far away, might be time for a strength bias program. If you're not, then maybe conditioning, skill, or well-rounded might be an approach.
My final say, we do 3 weeks of bodybuilding, and then we do the first week of the strength bias path starting May 20th. So come do it because muscles are cool.
I like muscles. All right, boys.
Sleep.
See you next time.
And girls.
Can I turn this off?